So I want to thank I'll call our partners for this evening, and I want to call them up to share just a tidbit about what they're doing. Conservation Works. So each of you want to maybe kind of come up and share just a minute of what you're. Jean, Angela, Groundwater Sustainability Agency. You want to share a tidbit?
Hi, I'm Joan Weir, and I'm part of Conservation Works, and we're working within 5 watershed areas, 4 of which happen to be in Sonoma County, and you can find more information at our desk back there. We're actually looking to provide people with 5-gallon tanks.
5,000.
5,000? Yeah, 5,000 gallons. And we're also looking for places to install tanks within community centers, churches, fire stations, things of that sort. So if you have any ideas about that, you can come back and see one of us back at the table. Thanks. I don't know.
Turn it off.
It's short.
Okay.
Move away from the
Yeah. Go towards the middle.
So, let's see. Yeah, that's good. I'm Jean Ritas, and we have a table for the Atastic-Gadero Green Valley Watershed Council, which is a group of people who meet to talk about ways to take care of that watershed as well as we can. We've been around since 2001, and then we were dormant for 10 years, and we're just coming back to life. If you can look on the map and see if you're in that watershed, and if you are, you can sign up to be on our email list and learn more about us.
Hi, good evening, everybody. My name is Andy Rogers. I'm the administrator for the Santa Rosa Plain Groundwater Sustainability Agency. Very governmentally sounding, but the idea is in 2014, Governor Brown, kind of on his last days, signed this law to protect designated groundwater basins throughout the state of California. The Santa Rosa Plain groundwater basin, which is essentially Windsor to Cotati, Santa Rosa to Sebastopol, it's the valley in between. And all the water that's underneath we want to keep sustainable for certainly us and our kids and our grandkids and forever. So the agency is formed to do that. We had a plan that was just approved by the state in January for achieving sustainability in 20 years. I have a copy of the plan back there. And we just received, we're happy to say we just received some grant money to really kind of jumpstart programs. And there's going to be a lot of public engagement. I think you're going to hear from one of our STAR advisory committee members here in a few minutes about the groundwater programs that are going on. So it's there's a lot of relevance to the future and through the agency, and we are going to only be successful as how many people we get sort of understanding and all doing this together. So thanks for letting me say a few minutes, and thanks for hosting this event.
And then, of course, Guayaki, help yourself. So, is that thing working?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So, for those of you that RSVP, I asked you a question about where your water came from, and this is kind of what you said. Most of you have private wells. And this blue is city water, 37%, although that's also a well, groundwater. And then several of you live in areas that have neighborhood well co-ops or shared well. Drought-tolerant landscaping, and which water conservation measures you've adopted so far. So these are some of the things that you responded to. And a lot of that was just really sort of seeing what you're doing. So then I do want to, every one of these events I mentioned Project Drawdown, which is a great menu of climate solutions that a group has analyzed and put up the top climate solutions towards reducing and sequestering greenhouse gases. But water resiliency isn't in there. It's not really considered a solution. Because I think it has to do with adapting to the impacts of climate change. And that's most of what we're going to be talking about tonight, is about how do we adapt our water systems to the impacts of climate change. So tonight, we're going to hear from several people. I'm going to turn it over in a minute to a young high school student, Mira, Sugino, who's going to share about some research she's been doing, some interviews she did this past month. We were working together to supplement this subject. So she's going to share a little bit there. And then we'll hear from Ryan Pedrotti from Sonoma Water about Sonoma Water System and what they're doing differently because of climate change. And then David Noren, who's a member of the Santa Rosa Plain Groundwater Sustainability Agency, is also going to get into the details of managing groundwater. So just looking ahead, this is the last event for the fall series, and we hope to start up again in February and March. And if you have ideas about topics or other ways to modify this gathering, this type of gathering, just let me know. And then I'll also be this is the Integrated Climate Studies is a project that's evolving at our local high school that came about from one of these events in May. And the idea is that we were inspired by Chico State doing this. They're adopting climate-related lessons in almost every class. And so we're trying this pilot, basically, at the high school level. And I just want to see a show of raise your hands. Do you think that's a good idea?
Yes.
Like, spread it out with all the disciplines? Okay. That's really all I'm asking for right now. But I might come back later to say yes, I support it, and I think what we'll ask also later is if you have some expertise in some of these fields, is to ask if you're willing to speak with students occasionally. Either they interview you or that kind of thing. So, all right. So now I'm going to invite Mira up here to share.
Okay, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so my name is Mira Sugino, and I'm a senior at Summerfield High School, but I live here in Sebastopol. So, like Tor said, recently, about a little more than a month ago, I started working with him to do a little bit of research on water resiliency in our local area. And with this project, it came to a culmination of an article I wrote, and that's what I'm going to be sharing with you all tonight. And it has a bit of the discoveries I made, a bit of the process I went through, so I'll be sharing that with you. And it's called Water Resiliency, Discoveries of a Sebastopol Teenager. Late autumn, and the mist has begun to set in again. This morning, as I drove to school, a thick blanket hung a constant 20 feet from the windshield, dusting off any of the lingering summer heat that tends to cling late into fall. To Sonoma County, this extra morning vapor arrives like a gift, a sign of the coming rains that will soon re-moisten the land, bringing much-needed relief from wildfires and chronically yellowed fields. Last year, rain flooded the county in atmospheric rivers, ending a long period of historic drought. However, below ground, our precious water-storing reservoirs were yet to be recharged, a process which takes years and years. As the unsteadiness of climate change begins to shake up our daily lives, it becomes increasingly crucial that we build our ability to weather climate disturbances. Water, perhaps more than anything, is our most valuable resource. Thus, it is necessary that we ensure our access to clean water at all times, as well as the adaptability of our water system to future environmental threats. The big question is, how do we build water resiliency in our own local community? 1 month ago, I took up this question. For a while, I had harbored an interest in finding solutions to environmental issues, but had never delved into the realm of water resiliency. It struck me as bizarre that, even after years of reading about various aspects of environmentalism, I had never pursued the topic of water beyond the occasional water conservation article. As a teenager living in an age of climate uncertainty, I was curious to understand more about water, and specifically what had been done, / what should be done to ensure our community's access to this life-sustaining resource. I dove into a research project, mainly hoping to answer these questions for local residents. What conservation actions worked best in the past? Where do we have the biggest opportunity for conserving water? And what resources are available to residents as we undergo the permanent transition to using less water? A week into the project, I discovered just how frustrating research can be. Especially on a small scale, looking for comprehensive data can be an unrewarding task. It was particularly hard for me to find specific answers to the questions I was asking. At a loss of what to do, I turned to conversation to give me clarity. I spoke to 3 locals embedded in the world of water resiliency: Utility Conservation Analyst Tara Sampson, Climate Program Manager Liz Plata-Berneo, and Public Works Superintendent Dante Del Prete. And I hope I'm saying their names correctly. October 10th, 2023, I spoke with Tara Sampson. With this interview as the kickstart of the project, I hope to get an idea of how other cities in Sonoma County were building water resiliency. As a utility conservation analyst to the city of Healdsburg, Tara seemed like the perfect first candidate to talk to. I was particularly interested in Healdsburg, as historically the city has had a high water consumption rate, yet with the drought has been able to lessen their water use substantially and sustain a lower rate of consumption even past the drought season. Perhaps, I thought, there was some tips or tricks Sebastopol could learn from this sizable feat. Rebates, Tara told me, had really made the most impact in the city's efforts to up residential water conservation. Healdsburg offers an array of rebate programs to residents, including rebates for installing gray water systems, rain barrels and cisterns, low-flow toilets, and water-efficient landscapes. These programs have been able to support residents through the transition to becoming a more water-efficient community. Around 70% of water use in Healdsburg is residential. Therefore, being able to lessen residential use with the help of rebate programs has made a significant impact. When asked about where she believed we had the most opportunity for conserving water, Tara brought up outdoor irrigation. Lawn conversion projects, she told me, are really important to work on since they permanently reduce outdoor water consumption. Lawn conversions generally entail the removal of lawn grass and the swapping of that area for more drought-resistant native plants. They are effective not only in lessening the amount of water needed to keep a vibrant yard, but also in rehabilitating natural wildlife habitat. Remarkably, my 2 other interviewees in later conversations both answered this question with the same message: outdoor water conservation is a must. For my second interview, I spoke with Liz from Daily Acts. A community-based climate resilience organization, Daily Acts has the goal of educating locals about what daily actions you can take to make a difference. This ethos was reflected in the conversation I had with Liz, who spoke to the importance of educating the local community about climate matters. What resources are available to residents, I wondered. What resources are there to help individuals educate themselves about water resiliency? Liz pointed me to the fact that many city websites have information on how individuals can lessen their personal/household water use. So you can check out these tips and tools for personally saving water on the City of Sebastopol website, as well as other city websites. In addition, there are also organizations like Daily Acts who have programs aimed at education and helping citizens learn more. Lastly, I spoke with Dante from the City of Sebastopol Public Works sector. From him, I hope to hear about the state of our water as a city, as well as understand specific details of Sebastopol's water system. In our conversation, he explained to me that Sebastopol has a unique water production and distribution system. Unlike many other Sonoma County cities, the City of Sebastopol manages its own water. For residents who do not have their own wells, all of their water is produced via a series of wells located within the city limits, drawing water from depths 130 to 690 feet underground. One specific question I had for Dante related to the functionality of our water system in times of a power outage. Because we mainly get our water from pumping underground sources, I wanted to know how we've prepared to deal in a situation where there is no power to run the pumps. The answer: Sebastopol owns and operates 2 reservoir facilities which provide extensive water storage capacity. There are 2 above-ground 3 million gallon storage tanks at the Pleasant Hill Reservoir site, and 1.5 million gallon and a 1.5 million gallon tank at the First Street Reservoir site. These tanks are kept 80 to 90% full at all times. Thus, the city has on average has 7 million gallons of water in storage, which would get us roughly through 7 days without needing to pump more water. In times when pumping more water is necessary, while the grid is down, we have emergency backup generators to do the job. When asked where he believed Sebastopol had the biggest opportunity to conserve water, Dante gave me the same answer as Tara. He said that we could benefit greatly from better regulation of our outdoor landscape irrigation, which is our second greatest use of water after residential use. Building water resiliency is a very multifaceted process, one which is not talked about nearly as much as it should be. From writing impactful water policies to providing supportive resources for residents to educating the public, there's so much we can do to secure our community's access to water. This research process has not brought me a singular answer to my questions. Rather, I've begun to grasp onto an understanding that water connects to everything, be it on a local or an international scale. There's such a wide web out there that I've barely scratched the surface of when it comes to our relationship to water and how we should prepare for the future. My research has not ended, and I will continue my efforts to uncover more discoveries in the coming months. Above all, I've come to realize the simple importance of conversation in our efforts to face climate change. I would urge everyone, whatever your age or your current expertise in these matters, to create dialogue around our water. Where does it come from? How can it be conserved? How is the local government preparing our water system for unprecedented changes? These are all important questions that relate to so many aspects of our lives. So even as a new season of rain approaches, I call for all of us, now more than ever, to push for action that will help build water-resilient communities. So I just want to drive home that point and that realization I had throughout this process and throughout conducting interviews, that I really believe that conversation is so important as we take on these challenges, as we try to build more water-resilient communities. So I want to say thank you to all of you here tonight for coming to this conversation and this event. And yeah, I think it's really important. Thank you.
Does anybody have a question, Mira?
Thank you. That was really helpful. I'm wondering if you got any information about the vineyards and what they draw, and yeah, just curious about that.
Okay, yeah, so the question is if I got any information around vineyards and how much water they draw. I will say that I haven't had that much time to go into a ton of research in a lot of different areas. One thing I am really interested in is the use of water that agriculture takes, since that's such a big part of our community. So I do not have specific information on that. I would be really interested in doing more interviews and finding out more comprehensive data around that.
Save that question. One of the two other guys might answer that. Any other questions for?
Yeah, you got it.
Thank you for your presentation. It was so well presented and the information was really helpful. A question with Dante did he not mention, and I have no idea what the numbers are, but in terms of this hard surface runoff, you know, it's one thing to convert our gardens, our lawns to gardens, which is a wonderful thing, but I'm thinking of all the water that's going to run down the gutters and run down the streets and our roofs. That seems like an incredible resource for keeping on the land and building our aquifer and groundwater around.
Okay, yeah, I'll try to repeat that question for everyone else. It was, so when I was talking to Dante, if I had got any information around all like the runoff water, and if we're utilizing that water, or is it being wasted? So I did talk to him a lot about lawn conversions and kind of rehabilitating our outdoor landscape, and I think that does play a big part in capturing runoff water. There's a lot more water that can be reabsorbed into the ground depending on what kind of landscape you have. So I will say I did not go very deep. I did not have that specific question for him. I was asking a lot more around what kind of climate measures, what kind of actions were being taken, but I do think that would be a good question to bring to someone, working on maybe measures for the future or regulations. Yeah. Thank you for your question.
Yeah, there's more conversation to have with the city of Sebastopol about potential increased rates, etc. And we don't have that person in the audience today for that. But so next up, I want to introduce Ryan from Sonoma Water, and he's going to walk us through the incredible Sonoma water system. Great.
All right, I'll roll without microphone. If you need me to speak up, please let me know. I have more than 25 minutes worth of slides and information, so I'm going to try to power through. But if you have questions, ask them, because I'm going to jump around the slides if you bring up a topic. The only topics I'm going to avoid are groundwater and the GSAs, because we have another speaker that's going to talk about those. So I have an amazing job. I get to run an education outreach program at Sonoma Water. If you're unfamiliar, just like what that is, the organization has intentionally invested in environmental education. In a normal year, we have 14,000 students either go on a field trip or have classroom programs where they get to learn about a range of topics, from storm drain pollution to water quality for endangered salmon to where their drinking water comes from. We've recently partnered with Sonoma Clean Power, and we run their environmental education program also. So we get to incorporate climate change and energy efficiency education as well. And so my background is actually as a teacher, and I kind of like fell into this role after I got my teaching credential. So that's just a little bit of context about me. And then the other bit I'll share is that when I talk specifically about our water supply system, I'm actually hosting a public tour on Saturday, and we have space available. So when I fly through the how our water is cleaned, if you want to know more, you can sign up for that tour. It's at the Education Center, which is just when you go over Wohler Bridge. It's on the right-hand side before you get to West Side Road. That's our home for bringing students out to. Okay, so I'm going to briefly talk about Sonoma Waters, like who we are, because maybe you've heard of us. We're a special district that was formed in 1949 to do two core functions then in the area. One is flood control. So think of flood control in the conventional old school method of building dams and controlling the flow of water. Obviously our relationship to flood control has changed over time. But some of our initial projects in the 60s were the creation of Spring Lake. Spring Lake, in case you're unfamiliar, is a dam on Santa Rosa Creek to prevent homes downstream from flooding. We were the local partner on the creation of Lake Mendocino and Lake Sonoma, which we'll talk about in depth in a few minutes. But really what our flood control program looks like now is vegetation and sediment management in over 75 miles of creeks and streams, mostly in urban corridors in Sonoma County. So like Copeland Creek in Rohnert Park, or big sections of Santa Rosa Creek in Santa Rosa is our flood control bucket of what we do. In the 90s, we became responsible for wastewater management in some small areas. Just an aside, most of the region's wastewater, for the folks of you who live in Sebastopol, is treated at the City of Santa Rosa's wastewater treatment plant. That treats wastewater for Santa Rosa, Rohnert Park, Pedrotti, and Sebastopol. We don't operate that. That wastewater is cleaned to a high level, a tertiary level, sent in the pipeline up to the geysers to generate geothermal electricity. That's where the majority of the region's wastewater is treated. We were tasked with managing wastewater in some small areas, like Forestville and Grayton. And over time, we have handed those wastewater treatment systems over to local community service districts. But you can see that we're still responsible for wastewater management. So this is the water that goes down your drain, right? That is not stored in drain water and treated to a level that can be put back to a beneficial usage in the environment. It's one of our tasks that we've been doing. And then water supply. So this is for most of Sonoma County, not Sebastopol, as Mira mentioned. We are the water supply wholesaler for the region. So that means we are responsible for management of releases from Lake Sonoma and Lake Mendocino, flows in the Russian River. We have pretty major infrastructure with 6 large wells adjacent to the river and a number of storage tanks throughout Sonoma County. You had heard before of Sebastopol having 7 million gallons of storage. If you've been to Taylor Mountain, each of those tanks is 10 million gallons of storage. If you've been to Spring Lake, those 4 tanks are over 20 million gallons of storage right there. So that's kind of like our 3 main buckets of tasks: flood control, sanitation, and water supply. Most of what we're going to talk about, especially on the adaptation side of things, is on the water supply or the water supply bucket. Any flood control or sanitation questions, just because we won't really circle back to them during our presentation.
Do you manage the system out there on Llano Road?
No, the Llano Road system is the one that the City of Santa Rosa operates to treat wastewater for Santa Rosa, Rohnert Park, Sebastopol, and Pedrotti.
Okay.
Yep, so it's all piped there. And then there is a pipe that goes under East Side Road that is a purple pipe. It's the recycled water pipe that goes up to the geysers. There are still some farms in that area that get access to excess recycled water. Some of those farms that are adjacent to that plant get water from them. But that's City of Santa Rosa, not us. Okay, great. So this is I know we're talking about carbon, but to center any conversation about water in our region, we have to talk about the Russian River. And this is a river system that is used by a lot of different stakeholders, interests. however you want to call it, for a number of reasons. Maybe just to start, we want to call out some of the ways that you all interact with the river. Kayaking, swimming. Drinking. It is the source of drinking water for 600,000 people. Fishing, absolutely. Agriculture. Someone mentioned vineyards. There are agriculture users who have water rights that can pull water directly from the river or in wells adjacent to the river. Yep, definitely.
Invasive redevelopment?
Yeah, totally. How about just habitat, right? So habitat for animals, habitat for plants, habitat for aquatic species, habitat for terrestrial species. But basically the picture I want you to paint at the onset is this is a river system that is used by a lot of different human and non-human interests for a lot of different ways. In a normal year, those interests are able to share is an interesting word, have access to the amount of water that they need. In a dry year, this resource is very, very much constrained. So I think it's important to start to understand all the different users associated with the river. I think most of you are probably aware of the history of the river, that there is there's a very strong recreational connection to the river, especially the lower part of the river. And there was a strong fishing relationship with the river over time. And then it was kind of fun, like just listening in on conversations. The river itself is like 110 miles long. Its headwaters are up in Mendocino County. The two forks you can see there, one north of Ukiah, the other one near Potter Valley, and then emptying out in Jenner. But it's important to understand that the watershed is the area of land that drains into the river. And so those boundaries that you see are geographic. And so the land use in that area absolutely impacts the river itself. So if we're going to talk about the river, we also have to step back and talk about the watershed, the area of land that commonly drains into that body of water. The other important thing to note looking at this map is you can kind of see, this is our built-out infrastructure down here. You can see our pipes and pumps that are delivering water from the bottom part of the watershed to the urban areas where people live. Similar when you look at this to the state of California, right? It's kind of ironic when you look at the watershed, you probably haven't seen that connection before. But in the rest of California, there are large reservoirs in the northern part of the state that capture rainwater and snowmelt and send it down to Southern California for agricultural interests in the San Joaquin Valley and to urban centers in San Diego and LA area. So kind of similar. We are not, another important thing to note, we're not connected to the state water system. That is another unique feature of our water system here on this northern part of California. So much of the state is connected to that system, but we are not. There are absolute pros for us not being connected to the state water system. And maybe I'll just, any questions about the watershed as we're kind of looking at it on this macro level, please.
Yeah, can you estimate what percentage the Eel River contributes to the Russian River?
Gosh, that's a great segue to the next slide. So do you want to go, I will get there. Go ahead.
You mentioned the pros to not being part of the state system, one or two?
Yeah, so the state system is, I would say one pro is that being coastally influenced, our reservoirs are a little bit smaller. They're by magnitude smaller, and so a couple of small or medium-sized storms can fill them up, and they can last for a year or two. The state water system, those reservoirs are really large, and they really depend on snowmelt, and they're really built so that snow is melting in the spring. And one climate challenge that the state is going to deal with is that snowmelt is going to happen, instead of over time, it's going to happen more spontaneously and earlier in the season. So we don't have a snow shed. That's one benefit of not being connected to the state system. The other is that the pipe doesn't go the other way, meaning when we have excess water, the state doesn't have access to get water from us. And when I'm saying the state, the Department of Water Resources has, we could have a whole conversation about water rights, but there aren't external users that have water rights in our basin, if that makes sense. So like just to specific example on that in the Trinity River. If you've been up in that area, Trinity Lake is a beautiful reservoir. Sad that it's a reservoir, the river itself is beautiful. There's agricultural districts in the San Joaquin Valley that have water rights in Lake Trinity. So those rights supersede tribal rights in that basin, as an example. That is something that we don't have to deal with in our watershed. So then we were talking about eel.
Sorry,
Yeah.
so you're saying the Russian River system doesn't supply anyone outside of the Russian River system?
No, I probably should have clarified that. We do provide water to Marin County,
Yeah.
and if you look at this map, Petaluma and Sonoma are outside of the Russian River watershed. So the water is not just within the watershed, but we're also going to talk about how water comes from outside of the watershed as well, from the Eel River watershed. But yes, those, as you can see, Sebastopol and Sonoma Valley and Valley of the Moon water districts that are outside that buy water from us, as does North Marin Water District. They get about 80% of their water from Sonoma Water. And Marin Municipal, so that's the water district from San Rafael to the Golden Gate Bridge, they get about 25% of their water from us. They pay a different rate. They pay a higher rate purchasing that water from us. But yes, there is water that goes outside of the basin. Good clarification. Let's go to Potter Valley then next. It's a bummer, Tor, the map you had earlier is better than the map that I have here. But what I'll do is just kind of like highlight what's going on with the Eel River transfer. So just in like Cliff Notes version, there is a tunnel built way up here that allowed water to flow from the Eel River watershed to the Russian River watershed. That tunnel was built in 1908, and the intention of that tunnel was to divert water for hydroelectricity. So Ukiah, that's where their energy source was in the early 1900s. That system worked well in the winter when flows were high. And then about 10 years later, Lake Pillsbury was built. Lake Pillsbury is a dam on the Eel River, and that allowed water to be sent through that tunnel so hydroelectricity could be generated all year round. What has happened since then is that the Potter Valley project has become about the transfer of water from the Eel River into the Russian River and not about the hydroelectric project. It was built by a power company that preceded PG&E. PG&E took operation of that project in like the late 20s. They've had a 50-year license on that project. Their 50-year license expired in April of 2022, and they no longer want to manage that project moving forward. There are a number of challenges with it. Hydroelectricity currently isn't working. There are seismic vulnerabilities on the dam that forms Lake Pillsbury. And any new licensed project is going to require fish passage so that fish can get past Scott Dam, which is the dam that forms Lake Pillsbury. So, a little bit of the challenge, those are some of the challenges associated with the project. What's happened over a number of years, but stakeholders in both basins have been working on what the future of that project holds. Sonoma Water, which has water rights in Lake Mendocino, has been very actively involved in the Potter Valley project, along with a joint powers authority in Mendocino County called the Mendocino Inland Water and Power Authority has formed to try to really center the water interests in Potter Valley and center in eastern Mendocino County. The Round Valley Tribe, or the Round Valley Tribes, have been active in that process, as has Humboldt County. And so they're working on, when I say future of this project, we're talking about potentially the decommissioning of the dam at Lake Pillsbury. We're talking about potentially rebuilding the hydroelectricity plant at the diversion site. And then just to answer your question specifically, which is how much water are we talking? Maybe let's start with context. So in reservoirs, water is measured in acre feet. An acre foot is 325,000 gallons, or an acre of land a foot deep. So a football field a foot deep, that's an acre foot. To give more context, Lake Sonoma full is 250,000 acre feet. Historically, there was about 160,000 acre feet of water that was sent through that tunnel a year, so quite a bit of water. In 2006, there was a biological opinion that was issued on that project, which basically said that the way that PG&E was operating it was detrimental to the salmon species in the Eel River. And since then, the amount of water sent through the tunnel has been cut in half. So now, on a good year, there's maybe 60,000 acre feet, maybe 80,000 acre feet that is sent through that tunnel. So basically, as we're talking about resiliency, the amount of water going into Lake Mendocino has changed pretty drastically in the past 20 years, for example. I'm going to move off of the Potter Valley project. Are there any specific questions about it? Because it is obviously a challenge to our region's water supply system. It is not directly climate related, but there are some climate components in terms of how water is measured throughout the system, which I can kind of quickly touch on. But that's kind of like a classic, it's a pretty classic water fight here, right, in our backyard. Fight is a little bit strong. It hasn't gotten there yet, but it will be interesting to see how the project goes moving forward. Great. So, when we're talking about Lake Mendocino, I think you can kind of see this here. Lake Mendocino is a dam on the east fork of the Russian River. You can see that right there at the confluence, or just upstream of the confluence. When we're talking about the Potter Valley project, right, there was water artificially coming into the Russian River watershed before this reservoir was built. So when this reservoir was built in 1959, it actually has a fairly small drainage area. When we talk about Lake Sonoma, there is a larger area of land that drains into Lake Sonoma, which is one of the reasons why it is a more resilient reservoir, as an example. But just a little bit of context. So the Army Corps of Engineers is the federal entity that is responsible for flood control. That is their myopic singular vision, is preventing property loss and loss of life for flooding. They were the organization that went in and rebuilt levees after Hurricane Katrina, the Army Corps. So farmers in the Russian River watershed throughout the 30s and 40s were like, the way to prevent flooding is to build a dam on the Russian River system. World War II happened, which kind of pushed these projects back. But the first flood control project on the watershed, was Lake Mendocino. And so in order for that to happen, a local sponsor needs to be able to tax the population base to pay for that reservoir. And voters in Mendocino County voted not to be the local sponsor in the 50s. And then then voters in Sonoma County had the same proposition go to them, and they voted to be the local sponsor. That's how Sonoma County residents have the water rights to Lake Mendocino. If you've been around long enough, if you own property, you maybe saw Lake Mendocino. It is now paid for, but Lake Sonoma is still on your property tax if you own property in Sonoma County. So that's a little bit about, maybe let me highlight, because it's a lot of information. These reservoirs are co-managed between Sonoma Water and the Army Corps of Engineers. What I mean by that is that when the reservoirs are below 100% full, Sonoma Water controls how much water is released from the reservoirs, and when they are above 100% full, the Army Corps controls how much water is released to prevent flooding. So again, their concern is flood protection. Our concern is water supply, but also we have to have water stored in these reservoirs for endangered fish. I'll get to that connection in a few minutes. Maybe I'll start with Lake Sonoma just because it's easier. 100% full for Lake Sonoma is that 250,000 acre foot number. That stays the same all year round. So most of this winter, for the first time in a few years, the reservoir was above 100% full, which is phenomenal. The Army Corps was releasing that water slowly. And then now we're down below 100% full, and we control how much water is released. The challenging thing with Lake Mendocino is that it's a smaller reservoir, and 100% full changes throughout the year. And so what that means is in the wintertime, in the middle of winter, the most water that can be stored in this reservoir is 68,400 acre feet. In the middle of summer, the most water that can be stored in this reservoir is 115,000 acre feet. So it's a pretty significant difference. And what the Army Corps does is any amount of water in the winter, and by winter it starts November 15th and it slowly ramps up to the middle of December until about the middle of March. Any amount of water above that 68,000 acre foot threshold is drained, and that is based on a rule curve that was devised in the 50s. So what happened in 2012 was we got a lot of rain in December. The Army Corps dumped all that water out, and then we had the driest January, February, March on record, and we watched all of that water go down the drain. And so that helped us for forecast-informed reservoir operation, which is a scientific approach to storing additional water in that reservoir. That reservoir in particular was a case study that we were able to work with a bunch of really awesome academics to pilot first, studying atmospheric rivers, so understanding how our storms show up on the West Coast. This is probably a term most of you were unfamiliar with a decade ago, and now all of a sudden you hear it all the time. Part of that is an intentional effort to understand how storms are showing up on the West Coast. But basically what they are is a fairly narrow band, like 100 to 150-ish miles wide, of pretty intense storms. What actually happened this winter that was really fortunate for us on the northern side of the Bay Area is most of these storms hit in the Santa Cruz, Monterey, Big Sur area. And we just got the side of them. They filled up our reservoirs in a lovely manner, and we did not have to deal with very many flood ramifications like the community south of us. If those atmospheric rivers were hitting us directly, that would alter how we're operating these reservoirs. It would really change, and every winter can be different. But just understanding where these rivers are going to hit is really like cutting edge and essential science. Then, to bring this back to our climate conversation, what we know about these atmospheric rivers moving forward, or what we're anticipating based on like studying over the past decade, is that they're going to be more intense over time and they're going to be less frequent. So what we anticipate happening is 2 years ago, you may remember, we got 8 inches of rain on October 24th. It was that crazy storm in the middle of the drought. All of a sudden, like, creeks were flooding, and then we didn't get rain for another, like, 2 months. And that was, like, the prime example of what we anticipate in a changing climate. And so we have to be prepared for those types of events that are moving forward. So just to kind of, like, bring this home, we are now able to, this summer, like in August, was the most water we had stored in our 2 reservoirs combined in August since they were built in the early 80s. So this is our best tool right now in a changing climate is reservoir management and using up-to-date science to help us inform how we release water from these reservoirs. Very, very essential stuff. Questions about atmospheric rivers or forecast-informed reservoir operation at kind of a macro-ish level? Cool. Oh yeah, please.
Can we just assume that there's a collaborative relationship between the Sonoma, with you folks and the Army Corps in terms of leveling off or eliminating or letting go of water? Yeah.
By collaborative, we had to go and have them pass an act of Congress to change how they manage reservoirs. So we were pushing and pushing and pushing. And it's like we've built a whole legislative affairs team to understand how the legislative process works in DC to get them to change this. And then you'll also, when we talk about fish, I'll come back, I promise. Part of our biological opinion, I think this is kind of a good segue. You're probably familiar that there are more than 30 species of fish that live in the river and the watershed. These 3 species are listed by the National Marine Fisheries Service. Chinook and steelhead are listed as threatened. Coho is on the endangered species list. In 2008, we were issued a biological opinion that said that the way that we operate our system is detrimental to these fish. So we have made a series of changes in the past 15 years. One of them is to build habitat in Dry Creek. So we are working to build about 6 miles of habitat enhancement projects. The Army Corps is also responsible for building habitat enhancement projects. So that's another example where we have to collaborate with them. Really, what all we want from them is money. meaning we have a good process in place to do the habitat enhancement projects, but we want them to help fund them. And that was another, it wasn't quite an act of Congress, but it required appropriations to make sure that they had money set aside for these restoration projects. But this is another place that, like, you can look at our system as a changing climate is like just, it is another challenge for especially these fish that are already imperiled. These fish are on the bridge of extinction. Really their primary reason is habitat loss. Dam construction up and down the west coast, you know, changes to the landscape we're talking about, you know, resource extraction, agriculture, things like that. That's the main reason why they're challenged. But when the species is at the brink of extinction, subtle changes like an increase in water temperature or ocean conditions changing can really impact them. And so our management now of the river system centering these fish has required an increase in monitoring. So we have, if you've been out to Dutchville Creek or Austin Creek in the spring, we will have traps that are set up. So we have an idea of how many juveniles are migrating out to the ocean. We have a camera system set up by our inflatable dam, so we have an idea of how many adults are coming back to the, from the ocean. So really our water supply system now, really at every point, is taking into consideration how it impacts these three species of fish. They're a great example of the canary in the coal mine, if you will. They are a great indicator of the health of the watershed in general. Any questions about the fish connection? Please.
What does restoration look like? And what impact do the dams have other than blocking water flow and preventing them from transitioning?
Yeah, good question. Let's maybe I'll start with restoration. No, the dam impact is the easier one to start with. So when we're talking about like Lake Pillsbury, that dam prevents salmon having access to 290 miles of tributaries. Those tributaries are cold, shaded, cool water, which is like premier spawning habitat, primarily for coho and steelhead. So like that dam in particular, California Trout Unlimited has identified as one of the 5 most essential dams to remove to help bring the species back from the brink of extinction. So it's a bottleneck. The other piece of a dam, like in Dry Creek, for example, Dry Creek would seasonally flood. And so that's why that valley is such a productive agricultural valley. And that dam has now changed the river's natural ability to disperse sediment across the valley floor. So that is an ecosystem change that the dam does downstream, basically. In terms of the restoration work that we're doing in Dry Creek is a great example. So right now, Dry Creek, let me back up and just show you. We use the river and Dry Creek as our pipeline. This is another thing that's unique from the rest of the state system. If you're familiar with like Hetch Hetchy Reservoir just north of Yosemite, you know, physical pipe structure, infrastructure that delivers water to just south of San Francisco. From our reservoirs, Lake Sonoma and Lake Mendocino, we use Dry Creek and the Russian River. What that means is that we are controlling how much water is in Dry Creek throughout the year. A little bit counterintuitive, but in the summertime, that fast-moving water going through Dry Creek is detrimental to juvenile coho and steelhead because they spend all summer in the creek. So they need places adjacent to, but still connected to the river to basically over summer. So one thing that we've done since 2008 is reduce flows in the river. This is like the classic call that we talk to kids about. Saving water is valuable in times of drought, absolutely. But all year round, especially in the summer, when we use less water at home, there is more water available in the reservoirs and we can reduce the flows in the river, which is a mandate that we have to do. So the fish want lower flows, kind of crazy. So the restoration that we're doing is one, is like erosion control, bank stabilization. But what we're doing is instead of like the classic boulders, putting in root wads that stick out into the tributary, which provide like little hiding places for the fish. And then the other big one are off channel. So like imagine a pond that is out of the fast flowing river, so the fish can hang out, they can get into the flowing currents if they want to, and then have a respite. So if you go to like Truett-Hurst or Cavera, there are a number of vineyards that have like quickly adapted to wanting to work with us. because it's like a feel-good thing to have fish-friendly restoration projects on their property. So, yeah, I can move through these other topics. Any other fish-related questions? I think it's a good connection. Please.
I'm sure you must have heard that the Canyon Rock Quarry is in the process of create asphalt adjacent to the Green Valley Creek that enters into the Russian River.
Yes.
And I'm just curious as to where the wells are that draw water off the bed of the Russian River.
Yeah, good question. I am not familiar with that project, but that's more just because like I have 5 people at home and I'm not like in tune to the current like local news like I was in the past months before that. So our wells, and this is where like I'll go through the very quick version because you can take a public tour in 3 days and learn more about this. But these 6 wells are Wohler Bridge. 3 are just downstream of Wohler Bridge and 3 are upstream of Wohler Bridge. So one of the, I will just say it, benefits of that location is that it is upstream of the confluence with the Laguna. So most of the river's urban runoff comes from the Laguna de Santa Rosa, fed primarily through the urban areas of Santa Rosa and Romer Park. And so these wells are upstream of that. It was not because that wasn't the intention. It was the geology of that area. That's why they were built in this location. But yeah, they're upstream. And just like really quickly, you heard earlier that Sebastopol does not get water from this system. These wells are different than a conventional well. You can see that there are pipes laterally in the ground adjacent to the river. But we are able to use a natural filtration process. Basically about 100 feet of gravels and sands filter the water before those aquifers pull them up and send them out. It's really, really high quality drinking water. Places like Russian River Brewery and Lagunitas want to brew with this water and not the water that's coming up from their municipal wells. Mostly just because there aren't naturally occurring minerals that are in this system. So this is another really kind of cool adaptive part of our system. And then I just like really quickly want to, let's see what else do I have. This is just very important for you all to be aware of. This is a guiding document that is going to drive really how our core services, water supply, flood control, and sanitation, adapt to a changing climate. And so for us, what this looks like is identifying our vulnerabilities to climate catastrophe and then investing in those vulnerabilities. One specific example is if you're familiar with Marin Municipal Water District and the height on Mount Tamalpais, that water district actually owns most of the land above those lakes, like Phoenix Lake or Lagunitas Lake. So the water district controls the land management practices draining into those reservoirs. I forget the number, but a very high percentage of the watershed draining into Lake Sonoma is privately owned. The Walbridge fire, you may recall, came right up to Lake Sonoma. For us, the concern with that is sediments getting into the reservoir. And so now, you know, like being aware of climate-driven wildfire and its impact on our watershed, and working with other government entities on how we can adapt in the state. It's just one example of our climate adaptation plan. I think that I should probably pause there because I want to give time for our other speaker. Any question? I know I kind of like fired through a number of topics and I've got like, you know, more slides that we can talk about, but any other topics that are not groundwater related that we can chat about? Please.
What is the access to water in a situation of wildfire?
Would you like?
How is that decided? Like whether they have access to that, or?
You mean like the reservoir, or you mean?
Yeah. Is there any connection if there's an unpredictable wildfire?
So do you mean that like can a CAL FIRE tanker dip into it? Yeah, our reservoirs are like in a wildfire event. Those tankers can be dumping water or pulling water from the reservoir. I think they have like jurisdiction to take water from the river too if they have access to it, but I don't know. I think they need like clearance to do those things where they can in Lake Sonoma. Yeah. Did you have a question too?
You talk about capacity for storage in terms of lakes and acre feet, and also gallons for the storage tanks up on them.
Yeah.
What is the actual usable amount? In other words, if you drain down,
yeah,
to get some point where at maybe 40% capacity you don't have pressure or you don't have water going into the inlet pipe.
Yeah.
So is the actual usable significantly less, or is that all usable when you say these amounts of water?
So are you talking about the reservoir, or are you talking about tanks, and are you talking about, because we can go down to like each rabbit hole. Are you talking about a power loss situation? So like maybe I'll just kind of like try to highlight quickly.
For the tanks, say a loss in water pressure when it gets to level 4. And for the
so with loss of water pressure, you mean we've lost power?
No.
Because
if the pressure in the tank comes with gravity,
yeah,
then
we have boosters to back up the gravity.
Okay.
So
you can use it all.
yes. So part of our, this isn't necessarily just climate, but building resiliency into our systems. We have booster pumps that can provide that extra bump. It's kind of a crazy thing. Gravity is awesome, but it's only like a foot high is 1 pound of pressure. So when you're talking about 50 feet high, that's 50 PSI, but our pipes are pressurized to like 100 PSI or something like that. So gravity is a huge part of it, but we do have boosters that back it up. I will say that the reservoirs, there is a silt-in factor, and like the challenge with Pillsbury is that it's 20% full of silt. So that is capacity that you can't get back. It is completely cost ineffective to remove sediment and get out of a reservoir. It's a decommission and move on type of thing. Okay, I think we'll pause and share.
And I just want to say, if anybody has the window to go on the tour, we went on it once, and it's pretty eye-opening.
What time of day is that?
I don't have to share the floor with anyone on that tour. It is from 9 to noon on, or 9 to 11:30 on Saturday. You can sign up on our website. What's that? Oh yeah.
Okay. Woo. Hang in there. Every topic has the chance to go far. So I just want to invite David up here. David's going to take us on a journey through groundwater topics. Let's just do that. Okay. There we go.
I'm going to do it without a microphone as well, if that's okay. So my name is David Noren. I'm a local resident. I live about a mile south with my family here. Been a long-term resident in Sonoma County. I'm an environmental professional by trade. Just by luck, I got on the San Rosa Plain GSA Technical Advisory Committee and worked on that preparation with a lot of other really qualified people in the preparation of the sustainability plan. I'm a rural well representative, by the way, which is kind of interesting because by sheer number, it's the largest group of represented people that use water. We have municipalities, we have ag, but we have just thousands of people with wells, right? A long time ago, I formed with some other really dedicated folk the Sebastopol Water Information Group, and we're still going on that. I'll talk about some of those efforts. And by luck also, I was appointed to the North Coast Water Board by a couple governors, and I served on that board for about 11 years. So I've been around a bit, and I end up here tonight to talk about groundwater. And I want to always just center myself in groundwater here, just at what I call my geohydrologic location. Where are we at? We're in the Coast Range geomorphic province of California. It's really complex geology. But we're in the Santa Rosa Plain. In the Santa Rosa Plain, as we sit right here, we're kind of in the meat and the matter of it. If we look at it, we center ourselves through the Mayakama Mountains to the Coast Range, from the Sin Pine down here at Katati to the terminal of the basin, which is up by Healdsburg. Coastal foothills, Laguna de Santa Rosa Watershed, which is super important. We have a creek system here, which is the Northwest Creek and Santa Rosa Creek are the two major contributing watersheds. The Laguna de Santa Rosa is quite unique as a watershed, as a wetland complex, and it drains the whole thing. And believe it or not, most of the water, a lot of the water, goes right under this bridge right here. Right, comes all out of the creek south of Santa Rosa, and the west side hills in Grange right here. And then the Laguna itself, along with Marquest Creek, goes to Russian River and drains out, as was talked about here. Contributing watersheds, of course, is Bennett Valley, where I grew up as a kid, Rincon Valley, the North Hills extending up above Windsor, the hills to the south, the hills to the west. And if you look at it, they're really big watersheds. If you look at the basin geology, we're really sitting on a big basin of alluvial materials, right? Underlying by this complex geology again, which is by name the Wilson Grove, the Glen Ellen, Petaluma formations, Sonoma volcanics, which are further to the east of us. The basin itself is between 2,000 and 10,000 feet deep, right? So it's a big, substantial basin. Rogers Creek Fault, by the way, over to in the hills to the east of us, and the Sebastopol Fault right here, where we are right here. I'll talk about that a little bit because I think it runs right under our house. Actually, the Santa Rosa subbasin then is a defined legal unit now. Or legal is the wrong word. It's a managed unit is a better word. And it's defined. It's defined up here, and it's a piece of the Santa Rosa Valley, what we consider the Santa Rosa Valley. 80,000 acres, 125 square miles, 4 to 7 miles wide, and 22 miles long. So it's big. It's a big area. 262 square miles of contributing watershed of all that Bennett Valley, Rincon Valley, and all these hills around us. So it's really big. Diverse land use, diverse economically, diverse in topography, includes large and urban and rural areas, like the city of Santa Rosa, Pedrotti, Roanoke Park, dense urban areas. And like myself, and probably a lot of you folks, there's a lot of rural area, a lot of what we consider living in the country. Unincorporated county. And our land use here is really varied too. There's a lot of residential. If we talk about the Santa Rosa subbasin, it actually has kind of a nice mix of everything. It has a nice mix of residential and rural land. It does have our cities. Some of the engine of our economy has our open agriculture and open space, which we really love. As was described by Ryan really well, most of our water with our urban areas actually is provided by Russian River water that comes out of Lake Sonoma and Lake Mendocino. What's really interesting, though, is there's thousands and thousands of wells in Sonoma County. Sonoma County has one of the highest densities or numbers of private water wells in any county in the state of California, between 40 and 60,000 private wells, including mine, and including apparently 50% of you, by how you answered the question before. And as it is then, it's very much in my mind, and I think in the mind of how we're evolving how to think about water, it's a shared resource. I was quoted in the paper a while back. It was kind of funny. I got interviewed by Guy Kovner because of the GSA, and I put myself out there a bit, and I made an offhand comment that we're all drinking out of the same milkshake, right? And with groundwater, that's kind of true. We're hydrologic neighbors. But when we talk about the Santa Rosa subbasin, it's actually an excellent place to live because we're right in the middle of it right here, right now. So I'm going to use it by example to have a conversation about that. One part of the regulation of water, so as I said, I was on the North Coast Water Board, so I did a lot of water policy work as an appointee. That's mainly water quality, right? That's regulating our wastewater treatment plants. A lot of land use, actually, timber, raised discharge requirements, vineyards now, dairies, a lot of things. As a basin plan, sets water quality objectives. Not drinking water standards, but for water quality objectives for beneficial uses. Beneficial uses is anything from drinking it, to critters living in it, to industrial and ag use, spawning and habitat, cold water habitat, cultural uses. There's a broad range of beneficial uses, and they're legal terms, by the way. There's generally high water quality in Sonoma County in the North Coast, and we're blessed by that, frankly. That's true with our groundwater and our surface water. You go other places in the state of California, and I did that as a regulator with the water board, and then you go to LA and they don't know what a river is. It's always, to me, really surprising there's no place like home for, I've always come back to here, and I think it's a hydrologic connection. One really big part of regulatory is called anti-degradation policy. It's a legal term. It's federally and stately defined in a state and federal way. In the state of California, it's called 6816 is the resolution 6816, and it's the maintenance of high quality waters. And that's one of the main factors for the North Coast Water Board, which is the all-powerful agency in the North Coast, for water quality regulation. So it's a theme that I'm going to hit on. So anti-degradation means you can't foul it. If it's high quality waters, you shall maintain it. That's super important to our groundwater. The surface water that Ryan talked about, they have excellent quality. We have excellent quality in our water system. As it's the Russian River, yes, it's impaired for sediment, but the water quality system from drinking water standpoint is excellent. Surface water, from the regulatory standpoint, it's governed by use by the State Water Board. It's governed by water rights in the fact of the Sonoma water and the Russian River system. It's called Decision 1610, it's a water right. That's the water right for it. The Russian River, 67,000 acre foot out of Lake Sonoma and Lake Mendocino, as Ryan really did a great job talking about that. But here with groundwater, which is really, really the interesting part, up to this point, it's really been largely unregulated. Right? In the state of California, unless you were in an adjudicated basin, which means a court of law said that you could use a gallon and you can use a gallon and I can use a gallon, but no more, then it's always been, up to this point, it's largely unregulated. That's how it's been. Sonoma County now has started to regulate water and water use now through well ordinance. There's a whole process now happening with the updating and changing and evolution of the well ordinance. And that's mainly driven by climate. That's a decision out of the Brown, or the Newsom administration. Brown started it as well, to then start to look at under drought conditions. Look at the city of Sebastopol, which was talked about as a water system. That system had a whole drought response. All public water systems did. That was a big, scary time, right? It's amazing where we are from a year from last year, right? And what came out of that is the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, as Andy Rogers is here as the administrator for the Santa Rosa Plan. The Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, as Andy said, it was adopted into law in 2014. It defines this basin, the Santa Rosa subbasin, as a medium priority basin. And SGMA, which is called, SGMA then requires the management for sustainable use of medium and high quality basins. So here we go. It requires them to be sustainable within 20 years. The formation of a local agency, which is the Santa Rosa Plain Groundwater Sustainability Agency, or GSA. And that included, by the way, 2 other GSAs in our area, the GSAs for Sonoma Valley and the Petaluma Valley, which are also medium priority basins, for different reasons, by the way. Petaluma is just a different basin physically. Sonoma Valley, believe it or not, has groundwater depression in an area, and it has seawater intrusion from the bay. So quite interesting. The Groundwater Sustainability Plan was a really big deal. It was a very technical process. It was represented through stakeholders like myself, because I represent 52%, I think, of you here tonight as private wells. And that plan went through a process of evolution, went through a process of being prepared by really, really good professionals, and by advising of people like myself and probably 15 other diverse people. It's really an interesting process. Submitted to the state of California, and as Andy said, it was approved in January 2023. Really big accomplishment. Big kudos to the GSA.
Can I, from a government point of view, what does sustainability define as?
So sustainable use, and we'll get to that in a minute because it's a great question. Sustainable use from groundwater, the way that it is looked at is sustainable yield, frankly. But you're also sustainable, there's managing criteria, managing factors. We'll get to that in just a minute. Okay?
It's a buzzword. I think I know what
right.
that means.
It's a great word, but what does it mean?
Okay. The government, especially.
That's right. So the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act in the Santa Rosa Plain, then there's a plan, and the plan was prepared, and it's brand new. It's actually quite novel. And it's modeled, by the way, on existing and predicted future scenarios. What's going to happen with this climate, what's going to happen in our water scenario, in our climate scenario, in our growth scenario, as we have general plans that allow for growth and encourage growth. We're a growing population in a lot of ways. And the thing is, it's necessary to manage it as a shared resource again. We're all drinking out of the same milkshake, right? And that I have a well, you have a well, you have a well, we have wells that need to be managed for that sustainable use. That water is then there for now, and it's there for the future, and it supports also the beneficial uses that are tied to groundwater. As we look at it, let's look at water use for a minute. We'll talk about this. So if we look at it from a water use standpoint, a water budget standpoint, there's a lot of uses in groundwater. There's a lot of uses. If we look at my well, it's a rural well. You know, we're a house in the country. But we know that there's vineyards. We know there's dairies. We know that there's some industrial use. There's a lot of urban actually in this city, Sebastopol is a great example actually of an urban area that's supplied by groundwater wells. In this Santa Rosa Plain then, inflows and outflows, if you look at it from a budget standpoint, and we look at what's happened here and how the water's flowing. So this is out of the model itself from 2012 to 2018, which was some of the data set, some of the primary data set. Water then, if we look at the mean, because that's the average, depercolation, how much water is moving and where's it going? It's going to stream bed to stream recharge. It supports our ecosystems. Those streams also recharge groundwater, by the way, because they gain and lose through the hydrologic year. It goes to deep water storage. Believe it or not, septic tanks are considered as a water return process. It recharges, it's an inflow. By the way, those contributing watersheds also contribute 7,400 acre-feet of predicted water to the basin. So the basin is a defined area within the bigger area of the Santa Rosa Plain. But 7,400 acre-feet are coming into this basin. If we look at it, of what outflows from this basin, where does it go? Well, somebody asked about agricultural pumping. 10,400 acre-feet a year. That's average over that 6-year horizon right there, right? 10,400 acre-feet groundwater vapor transportation loss. This is outflow. 9,500 acre-feet. How much goes to adjacent basins? Because it flows both ways, right? This basin is actually trying to drain to the Laguna system in the north. 4,700 acre-feet. Discharge to streams. Our groundwater is recharging and supporting our aquatic systems during the times of years, especially like right now. Our base flows. It's a really, really important part of our ecosystem function. If we compare ag against, this is municipal and industrial and rural and domestic use on the far right. 9,500 acre-feet within the Santa Rosa sub-basin. Right? It's a little less than ag actually. And ag, by the way, isn't just vineyards. We have dairies. We have some turf, we have some forage crops, we have a little bit of orchards left, right? And as we look at sustainable yield, then is 23,900 acre-feet of sustainable groundwater use is considered the sustainable yield in the system. Now to kind of put that in context too, this is at the GSA, and if we look at it in an aggregate over a time period, we're going from 1975 to 2020. The bottom is how our groundwater storage has changed, right? We've had droughts. I remember the '76 drought. I was a little kid. My dad made me and my brother shower together every couple of days. My grandpa hauled water home in the back of his truck. That was a really, really big deal. And you can see that that's affecting our groundwater storage change. You could also see how it changes the pumping and the groundwater inflows and outflows change because they're not static. It's really dynamic. We've grown. So when I moved here, in 1973, I moved to Bennett Valley. I think Santa Rosa was about 30,000 people. You know, Sebastopol's always been, seems to me, kind of the same, but it's really not. It's gotten a little bit bigger. But it's really interesting. If we look at the mean annual change in groundwater and storage, it's actually losing. We're losing about 2,100 acre-feet. So we're not quite, we're actually losing our storage slowly. We're over budget, right? We're over budgeted. Now, water use, if we kind of, if we then take a step back and we look at the Santa Rosa Plain, the sub-basin, private and domestic wells, the thing is there's about 5,000 wells in that donut, right, in that area. 5,000 wells. In Sonoma County, about, again, I've heard between 30 and 50,000 wells, somewhere in that range, including mine. If we look at, and by the way, those are not unaffected of each other. If we think about this as a system, the system itself is all in some ways interconnected. It's all basically connected in some form, whether it be through our stream and discharge in our dependent ecosystems and our streams that depend on groundwater to recharge that, or if it's just that well's a little bit over the line, because if you think about it, it's Highway 116 is this boundary. The western boundary of the basin is basically Highway 116. But above that is everything to the west. That's the Wilson Grove Highlands. That's everything up on Pleasant Hill and up over Honey Road and all the stuff in the western hills. And that gets a little bit different out there, a lot of different geology. It's not an alluvial basin, it's Franciscan Formation. A lot of that's water scarce. You go up towards Occidental and Joy Road, it's hard to find groundwater. It can be really tricky. If we look at large municipal users, Sebastopol is actually a really excellent example. Sebastopol uses about 450 million gallons, 400 to 450 million gallons of water a year, out of 4 wells. 4 active wells right now. One of them's well 7 on the top of Cooper Road where we live. They manage their water actually very well, I have to say. Sebastopol's doing a really good job in my estimation. As was said, very good job, by the way. I loved your interview and I loved your talk. Your spot, she said what I said, 130 to 690 feet deep. I thought I had effective, but you got it. It is completely dependent upon groundwater for potable water. Sebastopol is on its own. It's no different than me. It's just a bigger system. What's interesting, Sebastopol was actually supposed to, as far as I know, was supposed to be hooked to the aqueduct when water was going to be taken out to the coast to develop the coast. But that fell apart in the 60s, so Sebastopol never was hooked to the aqueduct. That's what I was told, and I've always heard that, but I don't know if it's true. It sounds right. The thing is, Sebastopol's had really big problems with historic contamination to groundwater, the municipal groundwater. There's a couple dry cleaners downtown and a couple gas stations that knocked out well 5 on Fannin Street, back behind Fitzel Enos or the feed store. That well's been inactive for about 20 years. It's contaminated with perchloroethylene. It's unusable. It's a really big shame. There's the other well 4, which is where the 2 one-ways go together on the south end of town. You see that big green tank right there? That's a big carbon tank, carbon treatment tank, because there's volatile organic compounds in groundwater from leaking fuel tanks from the old gas stations. So we got to be really careful, and we'll get to that too, because resiliency is a protection of our groundwater and our water resources. All right. The other thing about Sebastopol is they're my hydrologic neighbor, and I'm theirs. We are in the same milkshake. There's no doubt. What's interesting is I looked at Sebastopol well levels recently. They publish things online. Depth of water in their wells, static depth of water under non-pumping conditions is about 60 feet deep in well 7 on the top of my road. 60 feet below the ground surface is their static water level. That's pretty comparable to a lot of water wells, private wells in that area. And I'll show you why. At the same time though, Rohnert Park has a really big well field, over 30 wells. That for a long time, Rohnert Park was completely dependent upon groundwater. They then caused the groundwater levels in portions of Rohnert Park to actually be decreased or have a cone of depression, and it became a really big problem. They then took more water from Sonoma Water, and they've done a much better job at balancing and managing their water use. City of Santa Rosa, mostly surface water. They've tried really hard to develop groundwater, especially on the east side of the Rogers Creek Fault. It's been very difficult to find really the great spots because they are a municipal boundary. They own a lot of land, actually the land right across the street, the Kelly Farm and the Brown Farm, which are really wonderful, but Santa Rosa is mostly dependent upon and uses Russian River water. What's also very interesting for us here as we sit here today is the Laguna wells, this Sonoma Water Laguna wells. There's 3 very large wells, and one of them is about a mile this way. We drive by it every day. It's right on the right side. You see it. They have it's a big blue pump coming out of the ground, and that's called, I call it the Highway 12 well. There's a similar well on Occidental Road, and there's a similar well on Todd Road. They were installed after the 1976 drought, as emergency backup wells. So they were put in as a way to augment the aqueduct. They were used actually for quite a long time for active pumping. That water went into the aqueduct and it was added to the water that came from Russian River. It's actually had some issues. It's not really high quality water. It causes a taste and odor problem. At the same time, what those wells are doing now, there's a plan to replace actually the well at Occidental Road and make a more modern well. There's problems with that well, so they're going to replace it. And it offers an opportunity, and we'll get to that in a minute too, because the opportunities here to manage groundwater are actually really, really important. There's also, I've got to acknowledge that there's community and mutual water supply wells in this area. The Kelly Tract, Fircrest, Belmont Terrace, there's tons of little mutual water systems around. And they have a common well. They're just a small version, a really small version of a community system, sometimes serving 30 or 40 houses, right? There's also acknowledged too that there's a lot of agricultural use here. We've had a lot of development of vineyards. The vineyards themselves, the rangeland, some of the vineyard crops and food crops, we saw like 10,500 acre feet.
That was the 10,500 acre feet. Increase in ag use or current? That's the current.
That's the current in the planning horizon that was used for the GSA or Groundwater Sustainability Plan as the pumping volume through the period of 2012 to 2018.
Yeah, but we've got, so we've got 6 years since then. We've
Correct.
seen a lot of old orchards going out. We see a lot of new grapes coming in.
Correct.
So what's our number now? Do we have any idea? Like,
I don't know that off the top of my head.
Who's tracking that?
We'll get to that in a minute.
Okay.
So let's talk about protection. What can we do? Resiliency to me is a lot about our protection. We have to protect our water quality, right? We have to. Surface water and groundwater, there's an interconnectedness to surface water and groundwater. If we use the Sebastopol example, when we look at contaminating groundwater, man, you get contaminants in groundwater, it's the hardest thing to get it out, right? The best, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, period. You know, we see that now with, again, come back to the anti-degradation policy. I actually work as a consultant cleaning up and investigating underground fuel tanks and dry cleaners and things that people do on land that have actually impacted our groundwater. And it's really hard to do that, to physically get it out of there, to chemically remove that. We have areas that we have very big problems with volatile organic compounds. Take Sebastopol, if you look at optical coating, the old Golden Technologies on Santa Rosa Avenue, the HP facility down on Piner Road. I can awfulize that kind of stuff, and it's out there. You know, we have areas where drinking water is a problem. You're either going to have to treat it to use it, or in the example of the city of Sebastopol well 5 on Fannin Street, it's been deemed unusable to this point. Right. So we have then these established regulatory programs with the water board, with our county health department, with the state water board, and others that actually bring then programs of permitting, regulatory authority. I was a big part of that, and actually, I believe, again, in the interest of all of us to protect that water resources, that it's really important that we manage and regulate well, fairly and well. And then, of course, we go after and investigate and clean up legacy pollutant sites. We go and clean up those dry cleaner sites, and you can clean them up. Actually, they're hard, but you clean them up. We also then have to look at wellhead protection. Wellhead protection is land use controls. Basically, there's been some moves recently to ban the construction of new fuel service stations, gasoline and petroleum-based fuel service stations in Sonoma County, right? And so we protect that. We have our CUPA agencies, Certified Unified Public Agencies, or program agencies, which is our fire departments, our hazardous materials inspectors, county folks that are really good at going out and making sure that if there is a gas station or auto repair shop, or there's a facility that is using or producing hazardous materials and waste, that they're doing it in a responsible and prudent manner to protect the environment, which includes our water, our surface water, groundwater, right? There's a lot of regulatory levels here. Wastewater infrastructure, like the Laguna plant. The Laguna plant is an amazing piece of community infrastructure, just like that water system from Sonoma Water. It's amazing. That's $1 billion system, is what a fellow told me out there recently. It's $1 billion of infrastructure that takes all that wastewater that used to go into this Russian River system in Laguna, and now it's actually used and reused. 4 billion gallons of water goes to the geysers every year. About 500 million gallons goes back to Roanoke Park in Sonoma State, and about 3 billion gallons, if they're lucky, goes to ag. There's a lot of green fields from the dairymen. The dairymen want that. It grows them grass. It's a really important and vital resource. Septic rules. There's been a recent update in septic protection. We have a septic tank. Mostly everybody that has, in my experience, a domestic water well typically has a septic system. Sometimes, if you're lucky, you could be connected to a community system or a sub-regional system over here. But there's a whole lot of septic systems out in the world too. Septics themselves are seen as return value into the inflow into the basin. If we're going to inflow 1,000+ acre-feet of water from a septic system, boy, we want that septic system to actually be doing its job, right? Because groundwater, believe it or not, if you drill a hole in the ground right here where we're standing, you're going to find groundwater probably about 10 to 15 feet below our feet. Static groundwater is going to be right here. So if you have a septic system, you really want to be careful. You want to take care of that thing in rules and regs. Municipal stormwater, there's a whole layer of municipal stormwater management, which is what comes out of our cities and it goes into those creeks. Basically what's been called urban drool, right? That comes off and that first flush of rain is not very nice. So what do we do about it? We have low impact development, we have bioswales, we have responsible land use, we have handling and responsible handling of hazardous materials and waste. There's a whole big program of that. If you're going to be doing construction, there's construction stormwater rules. There's a whole lot of pieces to that, which is responsible, I think. And individual land uses for ourselves, that we're stewards of our lands, that we protect ourselves. I'm kind of crazy about this. My gasoline containers on our property, I always put them, that gas can goes in another bucket or goes into a shallow pan. So if that thing lets loose for any reason, it's not going to go in the ground. Because groundwater at our house is really shallow. I measured, we'll get to that in a minute. But individually, do the easy stuff first. And we could do it on the individual basis of our own residences of where we are and how we act as individuals or in our communities collectively. And at the same time, plan for the highs and lows of what's happening with our climate right now and what is predicted or unknown to happen in the future. Because it's actually going to be something that we actually have that's in our best interest as a collective whole. Okay, so the implementation of that great groundwater sustainability plan. I believe in what's coming. There's a fee to it. It's a program. It's an agency. It's a layer of right now advisory and discovery. It's a big process of discovery. What's actually happening? We're actually very lucky in Sonoma County. The USGS came in and modeled this basin in a really big, detailed way and updated what's called Bulletin 118. It's the hydrogeologic model and a hydrodynamic model of the Santa Rosa Plain, and it's really, really high end, really great. Again, a community asset, a community infrastructure and asset. So building on that, the Groundwater Sustainability Plan then now goes out for implementation. And one of the big things it's doing is establishing monitoring, looking at groundwater. What is groundwater levels doing? So there's a whole push right now to put in groundwater monitoring wells. There's also a push to do community monitoring programs. And we'll talk about that for a minute because that's near and dear to my heart. Part of that also, though, the groundwater elevation monitoring is using existing wells and installing new wells like this one here. They're also working with ag, and some parts of this is to manage that ag use, right? Manage that ag runoff. Monitoring stream flow, can talk aquifer assessments, land subsidence. There's many managing criteria to this. Water use and efficiency programs, which are, you guys talked about, some of us talked about tonight. Actually reaching out to stakeholders, you and I are in this together, frankly, as hydrologic neighbors. At the same time, grant applications, $15.1 million was granted to this group of GSAs, the Groundwater Sustainability Agents, for implementation of these programs. That is a huge, huge deal for our community. That's a resilient act in and of itself to go forward with the first 5 years of this plan, of the Groundwater Sustainability Plan. The Groundwater Sustainability Plan, which was just approved, is on its first 5-year run. It's going to be updated in 5 years because it's a process of discovery. It's a process of adaptive management. And importantly, then, it learns by a whole lot of mechanisms. This well that's going on out here in the replacement of the Occidental Rotary well and some of the bigger wells here is actually going to look at the aquifer storage and supplementation, ASR. And come back to the anti-degradation policy. The anti-degradation policy requires then that high-quality groundwater that's here now must be protected. So we're not going to take muddy water and inject it into the ground. We want to preserve then our large-scale landscape, so we preserve our areas of natural recharge. But it provides the opportunity to do groundwater banking, to change that budget, right? To affect and manage that groundwater budget. It could include injection of deep water. That water that comes off the Russian River system is actually really, really high quality. And it likely will include then taking that water and injecting it into the ground and banking that water. banking that water so that that water is there, the unseen reservoir of groundwater here. Because this basin is really big and has a lot of capacity. Now, again, water quality considerations, anti-degradation. You got to do that with real thought and care, because we don't want to degrade, and nor can you by law degrade the groundwater. But the Russian River water storage, the seasonal storage actions, and all that, that's underway. That process is coming. And it's very dynamic, very interesting. What can we do? And I actually ran to that, but let me go to this. The recharge of groundwater. We have on our property, we're lucky to have a little bit of land. We have over an acre of land. A bunch of it is just a little grassy field. We're on the edge of the lagoon, and that's about a little recharge area. And I just feel good about that. I'm doing what I feel is right out there to provide them what I think we're probably net zero on our water use. It could be practiced on large scale or small. Talked about rain catchment. Talked about changing our landscape uses or our landscape topography, bioswales, low impact development. It's landscape scale stuff, right? We could do it on our landscape of our individuals' homes, or we could do it on a larger landscape. And likely some of that could come into the future. It could be something that is contemplated to be beneficial to affect that water budget, the inflow and outflow of budget, into the positive, because it's in our best interest to do so. And we want to preserve our recharge areas. Recharge primarily happens on the Santa Rosa Plain, out here. There's a fair amount of recharge that is natural. And our stream-dependent ecosystems, a lot of what we're seeing now with the well ordinance in our what's called public trust areas is to maintain our habitat for the critters, the fish, the listed species that are within these water bodies, that are here too, that are also our hydrologic neighbors. I myself, I couldn't find a worse picture, but here I am, started a volunteer monitoring program. So I went local, part of the Sebastopol Water Information Group, a group called SWIG, which is a funny little acronym. We started in the early 2000s because wells were going dry in our end of Sebastopol. They were going dry, the older wells, which are typically the shallower wells. We started to measure wells, and I do it twice a year. I've been doing it for about 20 years. And it's quite interesting. I've been doing it in April and October. I just did it last weekend, actually, or the weekend before. So we're starting to get long-term data trends. And I have about 15 to 20 wells that I do. I could do them all in a day, in a long morning, actually. It's voluntary. It's really, really interesting. So I got to know these folks out and about on this edge of the basin and run out and measure a bunch of wells. It's also very empowering. It's empowering to the individuals, the people. I got Donna Turntine, who's 80 years old, and she comes out and she's what's my number, David? What's my number? Where's my water? Because she just wants to know, and it's really, really endearing. I actually take that water data and I report it back to every individual water property owner, but I also share it so everybody else can see. And I'll graph it and I'll show you this in a minute. I also share this data with the property owner's consent to the California California Groundwater Elevation Monitoring Program, I'll call it that. And it actually required that every basin has groundwater monitoring of some form. So our well water data that I've had in SWIG for the last 20 years is now reported to the state of California. And part of that, what's interesting, is this little program that we started in Sebastopol is starting to actually catch on. And part of the GSA, the Groundwater Sustainability Agency actions in the implementation of the plan, is to encourage similar programs. So there are some programs out there now. If you look at what's been done, say, around the casino, some of that is done by the Resource Conservation District. There's also some other local watersheds. I believe maybe at Tuscadero, Green Valley Creek folks started doing it. I recently went to Bennett Valley, where I grew up, and I went to a meeting with the Grange out there. We talked about it, and there's a program that just started out there. So they're starting, I think they measured, 2 weeks ago, they measured 8 wells, including my dad's. So what I call an intra-well data set. It's my well compared to itself. What's my well do? I would encourage, by the way, as landowners, that you know what your water levels are at times a year. That you inform yourself by measuring your well. Either by somebody like me that would get up at 6 in the morning on a Saturday and go out there and run around and do all these wells, or a developed community system that's coming through the Groundwater Sustainability Agency, because it's a real possibility. We don't have to do every well, but it'd be really nice to do enough to know better what's going on. We also see trends in individual wells, and that's an interwell data set. We could see basically that rise in Shelley's well over a 16-year period of time, that water's come up 60 or 70 feet. All right, so then the potentiometric surface map, we talked about the influence of the fault. I would tell you from the standpoint of voluntary monitoring, in and of itself is an act that is worth doing, to consider. To consider whether it be a program, again, with the Groundwater Sustainability Agency and the voluntary programs that are coming around it, or again, something like what I'm doing. Information, again, is empowering. It allows us to manage and be stewards of our watershed in concert with some of the hydrologic function, in concert with some of the watershed needs, in concert with some of the ecological needs, because we are not alone here. I also am a big proponent as an environmental professional of knowing what your water quality is. There's a lot of wells that are older that are 30, 40 feet deep. I've run into wells that, are really in bad condition. I know they're expensive, but to install or replace a well. But the thing is, if you're going to drink that water and consume that water, know what's in your water, right? If we look at natural contaminants here in our natural formation of arsenic, there's arsenic in our formation. The federal and state standard is 10 parts per million of arsenic, and there's naturally occurring areas of arsenic that are higher than that. And it's been considered a health threat because of the carcinogenity of arsenic. Hexavalent chrome. Up on Elphick Road, there's an area where hexavalent chrome has been found in wells. And it's deemed to be, it's actually been determined at this point to be naturally occurring from the natural changes or degradation of the rock formation of the Franciscan formation that's in that area. That those natural rocks are producing hexavalent chrome that gets in the groundwater. All right, and then there's things that are less scary sounding, like iron and manganese that stain your fixtures or make your t-shirt orange, right? Hydrogen sulfide. A lot of wells have this smelly that make smell. Ours is not operated very well. Anthropogenic, things that are man-made, nitrates, nitrites. There's a whole part of Petaluma, the Petaluma Plain, that has a nitrate plume from old chicken farming. And nitrates can cause what's called the blue baby syndrome, because the nitrates themselves prevent the uptake of oxygen into your blood. Volatile organic compounds. We talked about the city of Sebastopol being a prime example of no fault of their own. A dry cleaner releases perchloroethylene into groundwater, and it killed the city well. Right? Just sad. Petroleum hydrocarbons, we're talking about gasoline, diesel, that type of stuff, all organic compounds that are related to fuel, which includes benzene and MTBE and all those things. Leaking fuel tanks, we've really cleaned up a lot of the leaking fuel tanks. The fuel systems that are here, like the Chevron station or a couple other stations in town, they have full leak detection systems. Double wall systems are way different than they used to be. But we are still dealing with some of the legacy issues. And we still find old fuel tanks, and they're still contaminating groundwater. Pesticides, bacteria from a leaking tank, or inadequate septic tank, or leaky well seal. Pretty easy stuff to do, but I would recommend getting a baseline. It's not that hard. It's not that expensive. For probably that list right there, you could spend probably $400 and probably be in the ballpark to know what your water quality is at that period of time. Well metering, by the way, I myself am a big proponent of putting in a meter on your well. I didn't know how much water we were using. I grew up on a well and I didn't know how much water we were using. I know my dad would spray us with cold water to get us out of the shower, but I'll tell you, I put a meter on my well 8 years ago. I had an extra one from work and I slapped it on there, super easy. In 8 years, we have used at our house out of last week 400 and 261 gallons in 2,878 days at our house. And we're a pretty normal household. I take a shower every day, I brush my teeth. But if I look at it, in that water over that period of time, we use on average 0.16 acre-feet of water a year, which actually is about a third of what the GSA, the Groundwater Sustainability Agency, considers to be average, is the calculated average or assumed average for a household. So as we go then, incentivize and reward is my mantra on that. If the agency's going to charge us fees and money, my representation as a rural well owner is let's reward people. Reward because we want to reward those good actions. Charge me less if I'm going to use less water. I don't mind paying for the system, by the way. I think it's really valuable to do so. takeaways for us today, we're all hydraulically connected. We're all part of that water cycle. We're all in the milkshake. Water is a shared resource. This opportunity for the Groundwater Sustainability Plan and Agency offers us as individuals, individual landowners and collective users of this water, the municipalities and the ag and the other users. That system is going to be managed as a shared resource, right? And we change that thing, by the way, the Groundwater Sustainability Plan is going to be updated every 5 years. So it's very reflective of what's changing in the dynamic climate changes that are happening now, right? I'll tell you too that as it is management of the resource, there was a lot of talk about the fact that the Groundwater Sustainability Plan, they're going to put a meter on my well, they're going to charge me for my water, right? That government's coming to do that. This agency is not going to do that, actually. The County of Sonoma could require you to do that because they have regulatory authority to do that now on certain types of wells that produce over 2 acre-feet a year. It's measuring water. I, by the way, think that's a good idea. But it doesn't mean a loss of rights. If we take and I'll stop with this, but with the Tragedy of the Commons is a thesis in the environmental evolving philosophy, which was a tragedy of the commons where there was common grazing areas in Old England, right? And those common grazing areas, if you left it to the individual, you take what was good for you. And you didn't consider what was good for you. I would take what was good for me. And if we manage by that, then we're all going to lose. We're better to manage it together. Watersheds are local, right? Be curious and take action. That's my mantra. And information is empowering and it's informative. I'll tell you, look on the internet, look up the Groundwater Sustainability and Agency and Plan. There's tons of information, you know, how much water is being used, what's predicted to be used. There's tons of scientific data. You can noodle out all you want. It can be confusing. They've got great people, like Ryan. Ryan's actually on the Sonoma Water, but there's people that are distilling this down for the lay people as well. So it doesn't have to be scary or confusing, but there's a lot of great information out here. That's me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. So, okay, I have a couple questions. There's a ton of great information, and I just wonder if the GSA, the Santa Rosa one, will be a source for people to go, like, I want to find out what kind of meter to get, you know. That's one question. Or the water quality question, like where do you go, where's that entity that's going to be able to help individuals with property wells? And I got 2 more questions, we'll throw it all together. The whole slowing it and spreading it mantra, you know, it's like we have a field too. Will that agency be the one that's starting to help encourage people to do it, or is it the Goldridge RCD or some others, or a combination of people that are going to help that part of people, landowners, like be good stewards?
Yep.
So that's the metering part, and
The water quality.
water quality. Yeah, where do you get it tested if you want to do that? So let's 3 things.
Yeah, let's do the metering part. So metering part, I obviously put a meter on myself. I'll actually encourage, because we have actually a meeting on tomorrow. I'm going to a GSA meeting about volunteer monitoring. I think it's an excellent suggestion. I did that myself. A lot of people were scared of monitoring or metering, frankly, because they think somebody's going to do something with that data that's maybe against your property use or property right, maybe put it that way. I could see that again. At the same time, if we look at it as a shared resource meaning shared information. I think it's an excellent idea to actually put some information on the Groundwater Sustainability Agency website about how maybe well owners could connect with a local supplier of, say, like a standard meter. Great idea.
And I do have a note with the high school student potentially crew. Perfect. Out with this.
The hacks on PVC glue can be done. It's actually fairly easy. You asked about water quality. There's a great body of water quality, by the way, data that's around from the standpoint of tested wells, mainly what's called Title 22 wells that are regulated currently for use by the state of California. It's available on the Regional Water Board website. There's surface water ambient monitoring programs, SWAMP, or Gamma groundwater ambient monitoring program. There is that done, but that's not going to include individual wells. Individual wells actually is pretty much on you to do. Now, as a consultant like me, I do test wells. It's not that hard. We have some really good local labs, Alpha Analytical, Welsh and Races, who are the well owners for some of the well guys. Weeks is actually fairly tuned to do it. Jerry Bonds, some of the well guys, Sonoma County, are really tuned into actually water quality like that. They typically don't do low pesticides. They don't do things like volatile organic compounds, but they'll do arsenics and nitrate, that type of stuff. It's actually fairly easy. If you're going to do volatile organic compounds or other things like that, there are specialized bottles that you might need to do that. And so from that standpoint, that's a little bit more sophisticated, but it's not that hard. Really not that hard.
Okay, last question. I don't know if somebody else.
She's had her hand up for quite a while. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to ignore you.
That's okay.
Well, this, no, so, help me understand this. We have a well that's 200 feet deep, where it sucks the water out, but the water table's really high.
Yep.
And it's a lot of water. How long does it take for surface water to seep down to that level? I guess the engineering part, it depends on the geology. But
No, it does, but there actually was some age dating of water in the center as a plan that was done for the groundwater sustainability plan process and the USGS. And some of that water, I believe, was 30,000 years old, right? Some of this water, though, what I see, and what I've been curious about is if I see that rise in groundwater level after a big rain year like what we just had, was that this rain year or was that a rain year 10 years ago and there's a lead and a lag to this whole thing? I'm not so sure. I think actually some of it is really quite spontaneous, especially if you look at shallow groundwater systems like what I have at my house, or that we're near a creek where you have a creek system that is gaining or losing. The creek loses to groundwater, so it's replenishing that groundwater. It happens actually fairly fast. There's some areas that are really responsive to recharge, and it can be very good. What's interesting too is when you run a well, that water in that well casing, and that well is in that system, and that well casing has holes in it all the way down where that water could come in through the screens. It's called the screen interval, the sandbag. And so that water is drawn down, and then it causes a cone of depression, and then it comes back up and recovers. I actually had an instance where Doug Emery, who you might know is in town, he's part of a small community system up off of Elfed, and he turned his well system off. I think they have about a dozen houses, and I had a meter, and so I measured the well. I think it was like 40 feet or something like that. And I told Doug, I said, Doug, turn it on, because it hadn't been on all day. I said, turn on, let's see what it does. In about 2.5 minutes, it drew down 160 feet in that well. So that water went from 40 feet to 200 feet, so it's just pulling water out of that system like crazy. And once it stopped, it filled the tank up. We watched it recover. We could watch it come back up and fill up. And that's really super fascinating, that hydrogeology, that recovery. I do that once in a while because I have a meter called a sonic meter. You just press the button and it sends a sound wave down and it comes back and it measures the speed of sound and it correlates at depth. So it's kind of fun to noodle out and let the well run, let it recover and see what it looks like. And kind of basic hydrogeology. That's really fun to do, really interesting to do. My well, it recovers actually pretty fast, pretty darn fast. Some wells recover really slow.
All right, so we're way over time. Some more questions for David?
Sure.
Please stay and ask him. But let's give a big hand.
Thank you.